The gun was a cheap-looking semi-automatic, but in the shaking hand of a terrified man playing cop, it looked as big and as deadly as a cannon. It was pointed directly at my son's chest. My son Alex, who had come home to me for a few precious weeks of peace, stood perfectly, unnervingly still in our own driveway. His hands were held slightly out to his sides, palms open, a gesture of calm de-escalation that was so at odds with the frantic, screaming chaos unfolding around him. "He's a threat. He's been threatening us," shrieked Judith, the president of our homeowners association. She was standing beside her husband, Paul, the man with the gun, urging him on. Her voice a shrill symphony of panic and triumph. "Paul, do your job. You're the security coordinator. Detain him." Paul, his face pale and beaded with sweat, his eyes wide with a dangerous mixture of fear and adrenaline, took a shaky step forward. "Don't move," yelled his voice, cracking. "I am ordering you not to move. Put your hands on your head." I was watching from the open garage door, frozen in a state of pure, primal terror. My heart felt like it had seized in my chest. This couldn't be happening. Not here. Not in this quiet suburban sanctuary. Not to my son, who had survived so. Much worse in places I couldn't even imagine. They were going to kill him, right here in our driveway. And that's when everything went wrong. Before I tell you what happened next, drop a comment. What would you do if this happened to you? And subscribe to HOA Files? To understand that moment of absolute madness, you have to understand the 30 days of quiet insanity that led up to it. My name is Frank. I was a high school science teacher for 40 years. My life has been one of predictable, comforting routines. After my wife passed, those routines became my anchor. I lived in our quiet, peaceful house in the Patriots Landing community, a name that would soon become a bitter, biting irony. I gardened. I read. I lived a small, contented life, the highlight of which were the rare, precious visits from my son, Alex. He's the best man I've ever known, and he lives in a world I can barely comprehend. I tell my neighbors he's in a special branch of the Army. It's the simplest way to describe a life spent in the shadows. He's a Green Beret, senior, non-commissioned officer in the Special Forces. His life is a series of deployments to the most dangerous, forgotten corners of the globe. He's a quiet, disciplined, thoughtful man who has been trained to be one of the most lethal human beings on the planet. When he called and told me he had a 30-day leave and was coming home, I felt a relief so profound it almost brought me to my knees. He was safe. He was coming home. My only goal for the next month was to give him a sanctuary, a place so boringly peaceful and normal that he could finally, truly decompress from the horrors of his job. I wanted him to sleep in, eat home-cooked meals, and not have to think about anything more threatening than a crossword puzzle. Patriots Landing, however, had its own set of threats. They came in the form of Judith, our HOA president, and her husband, Paul. Judith was a woman who lived in a state of perpetual, low-grade terror. Everything was a threat to her. A delivery truck was a potential intruder. A teenager on a skateboard was a future felon. A dandelion in a lawn was a sign of societal decay, and her husband, Paul, was her willing enforcer. Paul had been a security guard at a local mall for 20 years before taking early retirement. He now served as our community's volunteer security coordinator, a title he had bestowed upon himself. He patrolled our quiet, safe streets in a golf cart with a flashing amber light, wearing a black vest with security emblazoned on it in big, white letters. He had a holstered handgun on his hip, a fact that made most of the residents deeply uncomfortable, but that Judith defended as a necessary deterrent in these uncertain times. They were a toxic cocktail of paranoia and power, a two-person regime dedicated to enforcing the most trivial of rules with the seriousness of a military tribunal. And the moment my son arrived, he landed on their radar. Alex looked like a ghost. When he first got home, he was thinner than I'd ever seen him, and there was a weariness deep in his eyes that no amount of sleep could cure. He spent the first few days just being still.
Out reading on the porch.
Helping me in the garden. He was trying to recalibrate, to remember what it was like to be in a world where every stranger wasn't a potential threat. He was quiet, and he kept to himself. And in Judith's paranoid world, that was the most suspicious behavior of all. The first incident was almost comical. Alex was a physical specimen, his body a machine honed by years of relentless training. To distress, he worked out. Had some kettlebells and a pull-up bar in my garage. One afternoon, he was in the middle of a workout, the garage door open. To let in the breeze, he was just a guy in shorts and a t-shirt. Listening to music on his headphones, Judith and Paul's golf cart came to a slow, deliberate stop on the street in front of our house. They just sat there for a full 5 minutes, staring. Later that day, my phone rang. It was Judith. "Frank," she said, her voice tight with concern. "I'm calling about your guest. Paul and I observed him this afternoon. His aggressive and intimidating display of physical activity was very alarming. Several neighbors have expressed their concern." "Who is this man?" I was stunned. "Judith, that's my son, Alex. I told you he was coming to visit. He's a soldier, home on leave. He was just working out." "A soldier," she said, and I could hear the suspicion in her voice deepen. "And his behavior is not in keeping with the tranquil atmosphere of our community. He needs to be vetted." The next day, the first formal notice was taped to my front door. Violation. Failure to register a long-term guest exceeding 72 hours. It commanded that Alex report to the HOA office their garage with his military. Identification to be vetted and approved for temporary residency. I showed it to Alex. He read it, a look of weary disbelief on his face. "Dad," he said, handing it back to me. "I report to a colonel in the United States Army. I am on official leave orders. I am not reporting to a civilian in her garage. For a security check, just ignore it." We ignored it. That, of course, was an act of war. Judith and Paul's patrols past our house became more frequent. They would slow their golf cart to a crawl, craning their necks, taking pictures. With their phones, harassment was no longer general. It was now aimed squarely at Alex. He went for a run one morning, a simple loop around the neighborhood's quiet streets. Paul followed him. For the entire 45 minutes, the golf cart was a constant whining presence a few yards behind. Him, like a sad electric predator stalking its prey. Later that day, another notice appeared on my door. Fine for $75. Violation, improper use of community roadways. The fine print stated that pedestrians were to use the sidewalks at all times, and that running in the street was prohibited. Alex had been running on the empty asphalt just as he had his whole life when he came to visit. It was a rule they had clearly invented on the spot. My own fear was starting to curdle into anger. This was supposed to be a sanctuary for my son, a place where he could feel safe. Instead, he was being hunted by these two pathetic, power-mad clowns. I saw the look in Alex's eyes. It wasn't anger, it wasn't fear. It was an unnerving, professional calm. It was the look of a man assessing a threat, analyzing tactics, predicting movements. He was observing them with the same detached focus he would use on an enemy combatant, and it chilled me to the bone. The next confrontation was with me. Judith caught me while I was weeding my garden. "Frank," she said, her arms crossed, forgoing any pretense of friendliness. "Your son's continued, unregistered presence here is a serious disruption. It's a violation. We've had another." "Complaint? A complaint about what?" I asked, my voice tired. "A resident saw him observing houses while he was on his run this morning, just looking at them. It's suspicious behavior. We have a zero-tolerance policy for suspicious individuals in Patriots Landing. The sheer mind-bending absurdity of it almost made me laugh. A man running and looking at the houses he was running past was now a suspicious activity. He was running Judith. People look around when they run. Not like he does, she said, her eyes narrowing. If he does not register by tomorrow, I will have no choice but to declare him a trespasser and have him removed from the property. This is a private community. We have standards. The conversation was over. I went inside, my hands shaking. The madness was escalating. I told Alex what she had said. I told him maybe he should just show them his ID just to make them go away. He looked at me, and for the first time, I saw a flash of the iron that lived deep inside him. "Dad," he said, his voice quiet but absolute. "No, this is not a military checkpoint in some foreign country. This is our home. These people have no authority over me. I've spent my entire adult life dealing with bullies and tyrants. Trust me, I know how to handle them. Let them make their move." They made their move the next afternoon. Alex was helping me. My late wife's old heavy oak dresser, the one from our bedroom, needed to be moved to the garage to be donated. It took both of us to wrestle it down the stairs and out the front door. We were in the middle of the driveway, maneuvering the dresser towards my truck. When the golf cart came flying around the corner and screeched to a halt, blocking us in, Judith and Paul jumped out. Paul, for the first time I'd ever seen, had his hand resting on the holstered pistol on his hip. "That's far enough," Judith commanded, her voice high and strained. "We have had enough of your defiance. Your son is an unregistered, unauthorized individual, and his presence here is terminated. He needs to leave now." "We're a little busy here, Judith," I said, my heart starting to pound. Alex, never. Taking his hands off the dresser, just looked at them. "Ma'am," he said, his voice even. "You are on private property. You need to get back in your cart and leave. He's being aggressive." Judith shrieked, taking a step back. "He's threatening us. Paul, do something. Protect us." And that's when Paul, his face pale, his mind clearly poisoned by his wife's hysteria and his own pathetic hero fantasies, did something that changed everything. He drew his weapon. He unholstered his cheap semi-automatic pistol and pointed it, with a shaking hand, directly at my son's chest. And that's how we ended up here. A standoff in a suburban driveway. My son, a man who has faced down enemies of this nation in the dark corners of the world, being held at gunpoint by a mall cop with a messiah complex. I was frozen, a spectator in my own personal nightmare. But Alex was not. His entire body went still, but it was not the stillness of fear. It was the stillness of a predator. He slowly, deliberately, took his hands off the dresser and held them out to his sides, palms open and facing forward. His eyes, which had been calm, were now 2 chips of ice, locked onto Paul's. His voice, when he spoke, was a different voice. It was not my son's voice. It was the voice of a man in command. A deep, calm, resonant baritone that cut through the hysterical noise. "Sir," he said, his gaze unwavering, "you are currently pointing a loaded firearm at me. In this state, that is a felony known as aggravated assault with a deadly weapon. You are committing a serious crime. You need to lower your weapon right now." Paul, high on adrenaline and Judith screeching, was beyond reason. "I am the security coordinator for this community," he yelled, his voice cracking. "I am authorized to use force to detain a hostile subject." "Show me your hands, get on the ground." "My hands are visible," Alex said, his voice still impossibly calm. "However, I feel it is my duty to inform you, as per state law regarding interactions with law enforcement, or those acting under the color of authority, that I am a legally armed citizen. I have a firearm concealed on my person." Out a blood-curdling scream, "He has a gun. He's a terrorist. Paul, he's going to kill us. Do something." Paul's finger tightened on the trigger, his knuckles were white. The world seemed to narrow to that single, terrible point in space, and then the sound of sirens. A single, piercing wail that grew louder and louder. A neighbor, seeing a man pull a gun, had done what Judith and Paul had only pretended to do. They had called the real police. A county sheriff's patrol car came screaming around the corner and slid to a halt, its lights painting the scene in frantic flashes of red and blue. 2 deputies burst out, their own weapons drawn, moving with a speed and professionalism that made Paul look like a clumsy child. "Police, drop the weapon. Drop it now." The senior deputy bellowed, his voice a thunderclap of real authority. Paul froze, his face a mask of panicked confusion. The fantasy was over. This was real. He dropped his gun as if it had burned his hand. It clattered onto the asphalt. The deputies swarmed him instantly, shoving him against my truck and cuffing his hands behind his back with a brutal efficiency. Judith just stood there, her mouth open in a silent scream. as the other deputies secured her. The senior officer, a tall sergeant with a grim face, then turned to Alex, his own weapon still held at a low ready. "Sir, are you all right?" A report of a man being held at gunpoint. "Your neighbor said you might be armed." Alex gave a slow, single nod. "I am." "Sir, I need you to slowly reach for your identification and your concealed carry permit and place them on the hood of the truck." "Of course, officer," Alex said. He moved with a deliberate, fluid economy, no wasted motion. Into his back pocket, pulled out his wallet, and placed it on the truck's hood. He didn't just produce a state-issued concealed carry permit, flipped open his wallet to his active duty, Department of Defense, United States Armed Forces, identification card. The sergeant approached cautiously. He picked up the wallet. He looked at the ID card. His eyes scanned the name, the rank, the branch of service. And then his eyes went wide. He looked from the card to my son's calm, stoic face, and then back to the card. A wave of dawning. Horrified comprehension washed over his features. He carefully placed the wallet back on the hood and took a step back. His entire demeanor changed. The suspicion was gone, replaced by a profound, almost reverential respect. He cleared his throat. "Sergeant First Class Alex Miller," he said, reading the rank from the card, his voice full of disbelief. He looked at the small, distinctive crest on the ID. 10th Special Forces Group, Airborne. He looked up at my son, his eyes now filled with a kind of awe. "Holy, you're a Green Beret." Alex just gave another quiet nod. The sergeant turned his head and looked at a now cuffed, whimpering Paul, and then at a hysterical Judith. His face was a mask of pure, unadulterated contempt. "You two," he said, his voice dripping with disgust, "are under arrest for aggravated assault with a deadly weapon and false imprisonment." "And you," he said, his voice dropping too. A low, dangerous growl as he looked at Paul. "You just pulled a gun on a decorated, active-duty member of the United States Army Special Forces. You are, without a doubt, the single luckiest, stupidest son of a bitch I have ever met in my 20 years on this job." The arrest of Judith and Paul for holding a Green Beret at gunpoint became the single biggest scandal in the history of Patriots Landing. Paul's firearm was confiscated, and it turned out he had violated several state laws regarding its open carry in his official security capacity, adding to his charges. The HOA was disgraced, the story hitting the local news and making them a laughingstock. The entire board was forced to resign in shame. My son was, of course, the picture of calm, gave a full professional statement to the deputies. He was the victim, but he acted like a cooperating witness. The deputies, especially the sergeant who had recognized his ID, treated him with a deference and respect that bordered on hero worship. We spent the rest of Alex's leave in the peace and quiet I had wanted for him all along. We finished cleaning. Out the garage, we went fishing. We sat on the porch and talked for hours. Normal, precious, father-son things. And in those moments, he wasn't a lethal soldier. He was just my boy, a hero. This whole ugly, terrifying chapter taught me a lesson. People who crave power, who dress up in cheap costumes and give themselves important-sounding titles, are just playing a game. They are children in adult bodies, building forts of rules and regulations to make themselves feel important. Paul and Judith thought they were confronting some suspicious thug who didn't belong in their perfect world. They had no idea they were threatening one of the very few men our country trusts to handle the real threats in the real world. They had no idea that his calmness under fire wasn't fear. It was a deeply ingrained training that was the only thing that kept their stupid, pathetic lives from ending right there in my driveway. They brought their petty fears to a real warrior's doorstep. They were lucky to walk away in handcuffs instead of body bags. Paul and Judith are out on bail, their trial set for next spring, but their son, who's a personal injury lawyer, has just been appointed as the new interim HOA president to help the community navigate the ongoing legal challenges and to thoroughly review all community security protocols and resident vetting procedures.